Hello, and welcome to Thinking Boldly. This is the podcast series for the Consilium Institute. I am retired Judge Julie Field, and I'm here with my partner, Heidi Webb, and we talk to amazing people in the family law space and have interesting conversations with them. Today, we are so honored to have Dr. Laura McGuire with us. Dr. McGuire is a scholar, survivor, and theologian. And I want to be sure that everybody gets out there and looks at her websites, drlauramcguire.com and equity and A&D agency.com. And we'll talk more about what's featured there and who Dr. McGuire is. And once you hear her talk, I know that you'll want to jump on that information and get into it for yourself. So Dr. McGuire is an internationally recognized consultant, survivor, researcher, seminarian, and author of the book, Creating Cultures of Consent, that was published by Rowman and Littlefield in 2021, and the Sexual Misconduct Prevention Guidebook, Consent and Conduct for Higher Education Campuses from Fielding University Press, 2022. Dr. McGuire was named as one of the 2022 Champions of Pride by the Advocate magazine, and they are regularly featured in media outlets for their expertise and approachability. And Dr. McGuire really is, she's a former teacher. She is one of the most engaging presenters I think I have seen, maybe ever, but certainly in a very long time. So Dr. McGuire came and spoke to our Tapestry membership and was enormously well received. So, Dr. McGuire, we want to take a little sense of that magic today and have some of that conversation here and share with our listeners. So, Dr. McGuire uses they, them pronouns. And may I call you Laura?
Yes, please do. And
So, Laura.
I will say all pronouns are okay. So if you use a different one, no worries.
Okay. All right, Dr. McGuire, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have this conversation, particularly around the issues of trauma and how we as professionals who work with families going through the restructuring process of a divorce can understand what we need to know about trauma.
So I would say that once a teacher, always a teacher. So I'm going to look to you today as our teacher, because I think so often in academia, people get siloed into their professional spheres. And for lawyers, that's no different than for psychologists or financial people or people in medicine. I think it's very easy to become very knowledgeable about something in a deep way, but not in a broad way. But yet our practices aren't so easily confined. I think people aren't like that. People aren't siloed, even though we can sort of do that in some academic ways. So I think as lawyers, the idea of trauma and being trauma informed is almost a foreign concept. I think for a lot of lawyers, they are used to the process of helping a client get from where they are to where they want to be in a legal process. But that often doesn't account for the emotional state that they're in. So I would love to have a conversation with you today about your knowledge about trauma and how that impacts people going through a legal process. So
Absolutely.
asking you to help us there.
Yes. So I think it's so important for people to understand being trauma informed does not mean you have every area of the brain memorized, that you're going to go out there and give a keynote or write a book on this. Right? Or a lot of times attorneys or other professionals in different fields that seem to themselves very disconnected from needing to understand the neurology of trauma and its impacts will say, I can't be someone's therapist. And sometimes I already feel like I'm being asked to do that. So why would more education on this be helpful, right? I'm not going to be able to just sit for hours and listen to someone's story. I need to get to the core, the meat of it, and kind of move on to be able to be effective in my role. And so what I try to always express is being trauma informed does not mean trauma expert, right? It means you have a working, actionable, applicable mindset and tools to do your role more effectively based on this knowledge. So it's having that different lens to be able to walk into what you're already an expert in and again, really elevate the services that you provide because you are seeing and hearing and understanding a deeper web of interconnectivity around what's going on with the person that you're trying to help.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like that slow down to speed up. You know, you have to really be able to take it in order to effectively help someone move forward. So, what kinds of things do you sort of see as being blocks for lawyers, or do you hear about from people that you work with as my lawyer did this or that? And you hear that and you think, oh, if they had known this, maybe they would have approached it differently. Are there things that are common themes?
Oh, yes. Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm fortunate, right? I meet people who are 50 years in the game, and I speak to students who are graduating from law school in a few months or years, right? So kind of the spectrum of what information they're receiving. I will say the perception that I've picked up is now we're having more conversations around trauma in the school experience. However, there's still a lot of training and professors and books that are coming from the opposite angle. So when I go and speak to those law students, a lot of times they're like, yeah, the teachers might have said we covered this, but wow, there's still so much that you brought up that we need to learn more about. I think some of the biggest issues come down to communication. I talk about that over and over and over because communication is the bedrock of all relationships, right? The little quote I give when I'm training people is what's the number one reason for divorce is also the number one reason that companies implode, which is also the number one reason for global conflict. What is it? A lack of communication, right? If we can't communicate effectively, we can't do anything, right? And there's a lot of layers to that. Being able to really listen to what someone's saying, to pause and let them express themselves fully. And that also goes into all of the nonverbal context of that, right? Are you creating an environment in your office, in the way you're greeting your client, in the way that you're having a side conversation during a mediation or during depositions that allows them to co-regulate with you, that allows them to feel centered and that you are a safe person that they can trust or not?
I'm going to interrupt you for one sec, just because I understand what you mean by co-regulate. I'm not sure everyone listening
Mhm.
does. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So, co-regulation comes from a theory called polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges, and it is a foundational understanding of being able to stay in a safe and social state yourself neurologically, right? So that goes down to self-care, which I also train a lot of attorneys about. And then when you're in that good place, your nervous system is communicating at all times with the people around you and vice versa. And so when we're able to be in that grounded space, other people that we're serving are able to meet us there more effectively and more efficiently because of what we're doing and saying. So it's not so much as you're going to tell them to calm down as you're going to be centered. And that's going to allow the other person to move up the ladder in polyvagal theory. We call it a ladder to a place where they also can, again, maybe give a better testimony on the stand, be able to understand what they're agreeing to when they sign something. And that even goes, again, communication, registers of communication. Are you speaking in legalese? We call that consultative or formal registers of communication. Or are you speaking at the level of the average person who has not walked this every day like you have?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think sometimes when I hear conversations about polyvagal, co-regulation, I think in terms of like blue zones and red zones and how people can hear or take something in or not. And I think that's something that people often don't account for in communication or when conversations are happening with their lawyers. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So, kind of hitting on that last note I just touched on, a lot of times the forms we give people, the files that we attach to emails, right? It's things that you've spent years of your life being trained to fully understand. Now it's old hat. You read those documents in your dreams, right? And even words like mediation or depositions. The average person has only heard those words maybe on some television show, right? That is not part of their vernacular. They have no idea what that actually looks like, what that means to show up for, what they can ask for, what's reasonable, what's not, right? And so we just throw terms out there and the other person's just kind of nodding along because they're scared and they're hoping things are okay, but they're not able to fully grasp. The other piece of that is we know that when people are in crisis, they're telling us their story, they're having to now go into a situation when they might see someone who has abused them, harmed them, that there's so many things going on inside the brain, but even separate from that, and this is, again, really interesting and exciting to understand, we know that the muscles around the bones of the inner ear shift when we are triggered, when we experience a flashback of past trauma or that's coming up for us. So we actually physiologically, our brain and our ears are telling us, listen to different vocal prosody, right? So if we're in a very monotone state or we're just saying, come on, make a decision, I have a lot to do today, the ears are not able to hear that. And then the brain's also filtering that to say, yeah, this is not for me, I'm going to check out. And what I see attorneys misinterpret time and time again is, well, I thought they didn't care. I have literally heard settlement defense attorneys say, I gave that survivor less money because they wouldn't look me in the eyes. And when I was talking to them, they didn't seem to keep track of what I was saying. So I didn't think that they had survived as much. They learn this stuff and they say, oh, wow, it was probably even worse than some of the other people who might have been able to have different support, different experiences, and pay attention in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
no, I was going to say, I think that just is on steroids in the courtroom. It's just sort of like so hard in that environment for people, especially trauma survivors, to be in that environment and hear all these things going on at the same time.
yeah.
What were you saying?
So my question was, you started the conversation really talking about, your ability to give tools, working tools to attorneys in particular and other professionals who work with survivors of trauma to help them do better. And you've talked about some of those, like the co-regulation and the awareness. Are there other things that you could say, these are a couple of takeaways that I want to be sure that every attorney knows before they go into a conversation with someone who's experienced trauma?
Yes, definitely. So I think going back to those different registers of communication, translate your documents, translate your websites into about an 8th grade reading level. And I know for a lot of people, they're like, well, that seems ridiculous. No, that's the average American reading level, right? So if somebody is looking for information, again, even on your website, they're like hearing all these cool, big, $50 words from the SAT. That's the last time they heard them. And they're thinking, I'm terrified right now. I'm desperate for help. I have no idea what this person actually does or is trying to tell me about their credentials, right? That's not also what matters to them. I think another big thing is people think their strongest selling point is being a bulldog, right? A lot of attorneys advertise themselves that way. We're a bulldog. And people are going to be attracted to that in the sense of, are you going to protect me, right? Are you going to come in and be this guardian of my experience? But so many more people are really, really hungry for someone who says, here's how we show up and care. Here's how we stay in contact with you. Here's how we make sure that you're supported through all phases of this experience that nobody ever thinks they're going to have to be in. And that's, this huge selling point that I think, again, we often market for ourselves, right? Attorneys are like, but I'm tough and I'm smart, so that's my marketing angle, versus what do survivors actually look for? And that's how the certification course actually came about, was my own lived experience going to my local crisis center and saying, do you have attorneys or mediators you can recommend? Anyone who will not have me tell my most painful and horrific story and act like I just read them the phone book. And they would say, no, we don't have recommendations. So the certification is to help people differentiate themselves that way. Um, and the other tool I think is really important is to also consider consent. Consent is another bedrock of communication that people overlook. So often we're asking people, again, in crisis mode, the hippocampus is offline, their memory center is not working effectively, the prefrontal cortex can't have us calm down because all the engines are firing that we're in danger. And we're saying, sign this. You cannot fully consent to something. One, you do not understand what it is saying. Two, you are not freely giving, what you are agreeing to because there's so much pressure on you in that moment. So building in those systems, how do we help people to be calm, to have time to process, to understand what's being asked of them, and the potential both benefits and consequences of that, right? I hear so many survivors, and I lived that myself, where you agree to things and you think, what did I even just sign, right? So making sure consent is also at play.
So the certification program, you've mentioned that. Tell us what that is and what it offers and why people should do it.
Yeah. So when I created it, it really was from the perspective of being a victim advocate for many years and a survivor myself and an academic who studies all this research and reads it day after day and thinking, I want a program where people can say, if this is what you're looking for, if you want that empathetic, deep listening approach where I'm really going to walk you through what is the most terrible experience probably of your life, I'm going to be someone who's committed to that, right? So at the end, they actually sign a code of ethics that says, it doesn't say I'm a perfect person, I'm going to get it right every time, but I'm going to make a concerted effort in all of these different ways. So that's the original angle. But then when I started getting messages and emails from attorneys saying, we're hearing about your work, can you create this as a certification so we can advertise ourselves as committed to this concept? They started saying, we really don't get any training on this. And we don't want to keep causing harm, but we really aren't sure, right? These are our blind spots. We can't know everything, right? And I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I don't know everything about the law. And so that kind of came together. And then additionally, I'll never forget, I had one attorney who emailed me and said, please include information on self-care. Because on the back of my state's bar card is the number for AA. She said, so many of us are struggling. And again, we are not getting education on this in our 3 years of law school. We maybe didn't ever have a background in anything like that. And we're burning out. Or what happens is people become numb. And they say, it used to bother me. I used to wake up at 4 a.m. with nightmares about the testimony that I just heard. But now I feel nothing, right? Except I have all these stress-related illnesses, right? And so that's the other part of the training. So we're talking about that forward-facing piece, what you're giving to others, creating trauma-informed workplaces, and then also giving that back to yourself, right? And why should people take it? I think a lot of people are attracted to it. They've heard these kind of 101 talks. They've gone to conferences. They're like, this is so cool. And they want, again, to really commit to the concept fully. And so it's a day and a half of training plus some pre-work. You're certified for 3 years. And with that comes 3 hours of one-on-one consulting with me or one of my team members over those 3 years. So you don't just get the education and then good luck. You can come back and say, and here's where I'm struggling with applying this concept. Can you walk me through some ideas? But I will lastly say, we always get in a big group, we'll always get some people who are like, listen, touchy-feely, we're all, kumbaya. It's not for me. It's not for me. I want to make money. I want to have an amazing career, right? I'm like, okay, thank you for being honest, right? Does this impact your bottom line? Absolutely. Who's going to give you the best word of mouth in your community? Who's going to be that referral source, right? And who's going to also continue to retain you as representation? Somebody who feels heard and seen on a holistic level. So yes, whether you're here it for the feelings or you're like, show me the money, it benefits you either way.
So is this through the Equity and Agency website then? So
Through the National Center for Equity and Agency, yes.
Yeah. I think it's great what you're doing. I think it's also contagious, if that's the right word. And this way that, when people feel like they need a bulldog to protect them and they hire that person, they don't really anticipate the impact it has on sort of the ecosystem of their case, whether that's a spouse, whether that's the other lawyer, but how it sort of exacerbates the temperature in the whole environment. And so the more people that are informed about how they can attend to everyone in the environment in that moment, not only the person that they're tasked with representing, but I think everyone's sort of got vicarious levels of trauma in that room from these very intense experiences. So I think it's sort of like understanding how to navigate that landscape is important too.
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think there's two really important points there that I do like to hit home on. One is that, again, people are often trained for maybe years or decades of their life, for example, in the deposition environment, to be that aggressor, right? If I can break someone down, I'm going to get some really good evidence. But we know that if we understand the neurology of the body and mind, that's not quite the best technique. And there's a great movie that I often reference called The Report, about how the CIA misunderstood this in the early 2000s. And they were trying to get information on terrorism, right? And so they hired these psychologists who say it's learned helplessness. You have to just torture people, literally. And then they'll tell but think about a deposition environment, right? It's a form of torture, right? You're terrorizing somebody, thinking you're eventually going to have them break, and that will open up these, pieces of evidence that you need. The truth is, what the movie points out too, the people who are getting the information about accurate potential terrorist incidents were the ones who built rapport. People lie when they're scared. Everybody does, even if you're telling the truth. You'll throw out answers because you're terrified and you're trying to fill in any gaps you can't remember in the moment. People tell the truth whether they're hiding something or not when they feel safe. So build rapport with that person. Start to co-regulate with them, even when you're the opposing counsel, right? Because it only benefits anyone you're interacting with across the board. And the other thing is, in a mediation environment, de-escalation is so crucial. And the way that we really do that, especially in a group mediation, sometimes I'm called in to provide trauma-informed support in those environments. And I'll say, remember that if there's maybe 5 people on one side and 5 on the other or more, somebody in that group is the leader, and everybody wants to be the hero, right? Again, we often sell even a mediation agreement, a settlement, right? From our perspective, how it benefits us or our client. Turn it back on them. How does this benefit them? What is the global win for everybody in this situation by moving forward in this direction? And that can shift paradigms so much.
Yeah, that's so well said.
So you have just a remarkable background, Laura, just in terms of all of the education that you have, and you're a theologian, you're a scholar, you're a writer. You talk about consent, you talk about trauma. Just really, what inspires you to do all of these extraordinary things that you do?
Mm. Wow, that's a very emotional, heavy question. That's a good one. What inspires me? When I was living a situation that wasn't safe and wasn't good, it was realizing, and there's a famous quote that says this, that I was in the wrong story and it was time to close that book and start a new one, right? I found myself in the wrong tale. And that was that first impetus to change. And my children, I have 2 wonderful children who are now both teenagers, and they were, especially that first momentum forward. My youngest was just born, and I said, I can live with this, but I can't have children live with this.
Mhm.
But then as soon as I'm also a high school dropout. That's an important part of my story. So when I was in that situation, I did not even have a GED. And when I got my GED, it was that first access to imagining freedom. And then I remember, never forget the day I picked up my bachelor's degree. I truly, and again, I'm a theologian, so I'm a theist. I'm into the metaphysical stuff, but I truly heard a voice in my heart and mind say to me when I got that diploma in the mail, "You are free." And I started to actually make a plan to manifest that, right? To create a new life for myself and my family. But that evolved, right? Because then I became a teacher because I knew education was that key that opened the door to a life that was also totally different than what my mother had experienced and other people in my family. I'm the first person in my family to go to college on either side. And learning from my students, I taught teen parents was my first job, and then students who were in and out of DJJ, young girls. And I started collecting their stories, and that became woven into the tapestry of my heart. And I wanted to then get a doctorate that highlighted their experiences and voices. And that's what I did. And then moved on to working in universities and for the military. And again, each experience kind of added to this mosaic, this constellation of what I felt called to do in this world. And there was always a piece a little bit missing. And that's where the theology came in. I really wanted to create a trauma-informed theology first, again, selfishly for myself, but then to be able to offer to people who do have a desire to have a connection to some higher power, but need to reject the toxic tropes that they've maybe heard that diminish their experience in reality. So that's what inspires
So
me to get up every day.
I'm interested in
Wow.
what your theology training was at seminary and how that was received when maybe you entered a more traditional theological framework with a goal to sort of like, as you said, sort of to throw out those old tropes in a sense and bring something new into or new interpretation into that space. How did that go?
It's been interesting. It's been interesting. I'm fortunate. I have some forebearers who have done a lot of this work for me, right? I'm not the first person, luckily, but yeah, it's a huge talking about paradigms, a huge shift. I'm very lucky. I went to a very progressive seminary that's interfaith, and it's the only Quaker seminary still around, Earlham School of Religion. Shout out to them. And it was a space where I was allowed to explore and be out of the box and, even shake up things in my classes where people might not agree with me. I think the two big things that I really took on in depth that are always going to rattle some people are rejecting the idea of omnipotence, of like an all-powerful God that chooses to protect some people and not others. And the theologian Thomas J. Ord wrote this incredible book for survivors called God Can't, about reframing a theology that believes in a God that is always fighting for the good of everyone, but has limitations. And so it's not some people get lucky or blessed and others don't. It's the limitations of free will of a million things, people, nature, etc. And the other big one, and this I think eventually will become a chapter in a book, my third book, is really finding strong interfaith, especially outside of Christianity, perspectives that reject forced forgiveness or that forgiveness is necessary for healing. And that's the one where people are like, whoa, 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 whoa. Where are you going with this? And I actually, when I preach on this, I'll bring examples up from a lot of family court cases where there are news articles where people were told by their therapist or other individual, you have to forgive them. We have to move forward. You can move forward and not choose to forgive. And forgiveness is also multifaceted. There's a level where it's acceptance of the past, and there's a level where it's absolvement. And a lot of times we conflate the two. And it's important to give people permission to say, actually, a ton of world religions say this is not necessary. You can heal. You can have a beautiful future. And if that word and that concept doesn't resonate with you, that's totally all right. You're not the bad guy.
Yeah. When you raise that, it reminds me of um, Judith Herman, Dr. Judith Herman, who recently wrote a book called Truth and Repair that talks about what survivors want. And what survivors want is for us to see what they've experienced and do what we can within our power to stop it. That's sort of the, the short and sweet summary of what I've taken from that book. And it sounds like that's a lot of what you're saying too, both in terms of incorporating your theological training and your work with trauma and understanding trauma. Does that resonate? Is that
Yeah.
correct? Or do you have a different spin on that at all?
No, I think that's absolutely accurate. And there's another theological book that just came out on this from a Jewish perspective by Rabbi Ruttenberg. I think it's called Repair and Reconciliation. But that's another excellent resource, and that's from a restorative practice framework, right? And in the Jewish context of when is it appropriate to have forgiveness and when is it appropriate to say, I need to take care of myself, but I do not have to offer this. And it's interesting, right? Because the other world religions, truly outside of Christianity, even Confucianism, Hinduism, etc., believe that the onus, the responsibility for reconciliation or forgiveness is only on the perpetrator. Only. It is not the business of the survivor. Their business is to take care of themselves. And also that healing for them has to be communal. We don't actually heal alone, right? So it's the responsibility is then on the community to provide that safe space for them. It is then on the perpetrator to do the work to atone until they reach a level where the person could accept their apology. And the science of apology, from a psychology standpoint, also supports that, right? People have to be ripe and ready, and it has to be an apology that's focused on truly atoning and accepting what they've done versus excusing in any way.
Mhm.
Say amen. Um, um, there was another topic I wanted to just touch on with you in terms of intersectionality and
Mhm.
identity and how we show up as professionals and how our biases and, how we affiliate can influence or interrupt or impact our relationships with the people that we're trying to help. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
Mm. Yeah, that could be its own podcast episode. That's a huge topic. And I think particularly right now, right, in the political climate we're in, people are starting to backpedal and move away from that. But there's a concept also in communication theory about high versus low context communication and how different cultures have that at play, right? And I won't go off into the details of it, but one of the things you bring up goes into that high context piece, which is that for many people in many cultures, it is about, again, how are you showing up? Are you showing up as your authentic self? Again, especially for attorneys, are you showing up as a fellow human being? Right? And engaging and being curious about that person's identity as well, right? We as human beings have that cognitive bias. We put people into templates, right? I meet someone, you today, right? I see how, okay, you're about this, oh, you have this career background, dress this way, your hairstyle's like that. Okay, I bet I can guess your political affiliation, your beliefs, who you are, right? So we have to then choose to interrupt that thought process and say, how do I, again, really engage with understanding this person holistically? Because, again, ultimately, even if someone says, yeah, I'm not super invested in everyone's identity and their history, but it's going to benefit you because that's going to show up in every space that you are representing this person. And if you don't have that full framework to be pulling from, you are not going to be as effective and your outcomes and the client satisfaction is going to suffer.
Yeah, 100%. So, Laura, I saw you wave your hand, and when you did, I saw that you had a tattoo.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you'd share with us what it is and why you have it, like what
Oh,
behind it is.
I have so many tattoos. I'm 12. So,
Got one, so there you go.
yeah. Okay. Well, so I will start because it's about to be June with these two, and then I'll tell you about this was my newest one because it's about survivors, and we can kind of end on that. So this one I got in 2015 when marriage equality became the law of the land. And it was such an emotional day. I always plan out my tattoos many months, if not years in advance, and kind of like marinate and decide on them. But this one I got in the spur of the moment, truly like watching that announcement on the news, crying in my mom's arms. And then I was going to a play, which was a play of coming out stories that night. And on my way to the play, I stopped by a tattoo parlor. And it was a very also spiritual experience. With every kind of hit of that tattoo needle, I thought about the pain of feeling shame about my identities and experience, and to channel that emotional pain into the physical pain to release it.
Hmm.
Um, and then I got this one, sadly, for it's the equality symbol for the Pulse massacre that happened the year after. Right, so kind of
Oh,
reflection on the balance there. But this tattoo I just got, and it is a ginkgo leaf. And
Oh.
if people don't know about ginkgo leaves, they're so cool. They're called the survivor tree. They are the only living organism to survive both what we believe is the impact that killed the dinosaurs and the bomb at Hiroshima. There are still ginkgo trees that have survived to this day from that impact, and their saplings are at the University of Oxford and have been sent all around the world as a reminder of what we can survive. So this is that memory, right? That for so many of us who have gone through the things that you serve in your professional roles, it does feel like an atomic bomb has landed on our lives. And again, we never imagined we would have to live through these things, much less all the ripple effect of injustice in the systems we then have to navigate. And yet here we still are. So that's a daily reminder of that.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing yourself and your story and your tattoos.
Thank you.
yeah. And Laura, you really are, in the conversations that I've had with you today and other times, you are such a deep thinker. You are such an amazing teacher, and really just somebody who can bring things to a place where people can understand them and apply them. And the gift that you have and that you've shared with us today is something extraordinary. And I just feel so privileged to be a colleague of yours. And thank you again for everything that you do, everything that you teach, and every new adventure that awaits you as you have rewritten your story.
Mm. Thank you so much. I appreciate it deeply.